A little 14-year-old girl runs into the hospital carrying a baby in her arms, and she reveals the horrible truth. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of St. Mary's Hospital, located in a quiet suburb of New York. The halls were only beginning to stir with the early shift staff, who moved through the corridors exchanging casual greetings and sipping on their freshly brewed coffee. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the aroma of coffee created a familiar sense of routine for everyone working there. Rachel Thompson, the head nurse with nearly 2 decades of experience, was at the front desk, organizing patient files and mentally preparing for what she hoped would be another routine day. She adjusted her glasses, focused on a particularly stubborn stack of forms. Little did she know, this would be anything but a typical day. The sliding glass doors at the hospital's entrance suddenly whooshed open, catching Rachel's attention. She glanced up, expecting to see a patient or a hurried colleague. Instead, she froze. A young girl, no older than 15, stepped inside. Her brown hair was tangled, her pale face smeared with dirt, and her clothing, a loose, wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants, suggested she had left in haste. But what truly shocked Rachel wasn't the girl's appearance. It was the small bundle cradled protectively in her arms. Rachel immediately put down the files and moved around the desk with a sense of urgency. She approached cautiously, her voice low and steady. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she asked, trying to mask the concern that threatened to spill over. The girl's wide eyes met Rachel's, filled with exhaustion, fear, and something even deeper, an instinctive protectiveness. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she held the bundle closer, as if shielding it from the world. I was told to come here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel nodded, her heart pounding. "You did the right thing. Let's get you both some help, okay?" She reached out carefully, leading the girl into a nearby examination room. Once inside, Rachel signaled for assistance. Within moments, 2 other nurses joined them. As Rachel gently guided the girl to sit down, she asked softly, "Can you tell me your name?" The girl swallowed hard before speaking, her voice barely audible. "Emma," she said. "My name is Emma." "Emma," Rachel repeated with a comforting smile. "I'm Rachel. You're safe here." She glanced at the bundle in Emma's arms. "Is it okay if we check on the baby?" Emma's grip tightened. "You won't take him away, will you?" she asked, her voice laced with desperation. Rachel exchanged a quick look with one of the other nurses, who nodded in silent understanding. "No one is taking him away, Emma," Rachel assured her. "We just want to make sure you're both okay." Slowly, Emma loosened her hold, allowing Rachel to peel back the blanket. A newborn's tiny face emerged, peaceful and unaware of the chaos surrounding him. Rachel's chest constricted. He couldn't have been more than a few hours old. "Dr. Bennett!" Rachel called, her voice firm. Within moments, Dr. Mark Bennett, a seasoned pediatrician known for his steady hands and even steadier demeanor, entered the room. "What's the situation?" Dr. Bennett asked, as he took in the scene. "This is Emma," Rachel said, her voice carefully neutral. "She just arrived, carrying a newborn." Dr. Bennett approached with calm professionalism, his gaze softening as he crouched to meet Emma's eyes. "Hello, Emma. I'm Dr. Bennett. We're going to take care of you and the baby, all right? Can I have a look at both of you?" Emma hesitated, glancing at Rachel, who nodded reassuringly. With trembling hands, Emma allowed herself to be examined. As Dr. Bennett worked, he noticed bruises on her arms and the way she winced with every movement, a sign of deep pain that went far beyond physical exhaustion. "Emma," Dr. Bennett asked gently, "can you tell me what happened?" Emma's gaze drifted to the floor, and for a long moment, silence hung in the air. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't know. I woke up, and he was there. It hurt so much." Rachel felt a wave of emotions: anger, compassion, determination. This was only the beginning of a story they had to unravel, one with layers of pain, secrets, and resilience. But right now, their priority was clear. They needed to help Emma and the baby survive this day and whatever would come next. The emergency examination room was filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the hushed whispers of the medical staff. Emma sat on the hospital bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes darting nervously around the room. The bundle of blankets that had been her singular focus was now in the hands of Nurse Rachel, who gently rocked the newborn in her arms. Dr. Mark Bennett, having finished a quick preliminary exam of Emma, turned his attention back to the frightened girl. "Emma," Dr. Bennett began softly, pulling a stool closer to the bed so he could sit at eye level. "I'd like to ask you some questions to help us understand what's going on, but if at any point you need to stop or feel uncomfortable, you just let me know, okay?" Emma nodded slowly, though the wariness in her eyes remained. "First," he continued, his voice calm and measured, "we need to make sure you're physically okay. I'm going to have a nurse come in to check on you a little more thoroughly. Is that all right?" She hesitated but nodded again. Dr. Bennett stood and gestured for Rachel to step out of the room. Moments later, a nurse named Carol entered, introducing herself with a warm smile. "Hi, Emma. I'm here to make sure you're feeling as good as possible, okay?" She spoke with a kindness that put many of her patients at ease. Carol's gentle demeanor, however, did little to ease the pain in Emma's eyes as she complied with the medical checks. Outside the examination room, Dr. Bennett conferred with Rachel. "She's in pain," he said quietly. "We need to understand the extent of it, both physical and emotional." Rachel nodded, glancing through the window at the fragile girl inside. "I've never seen anything like this, Mark," she murmured. "There's so much fear in her. Whatever happened, it's more than what we can see." As the medical checks continued, the staff noticed visible bruising and evidence of recent trauma. Emma flinched each time they touched a tender spot. Dr. Bennett took note of every detail, his concern growing by the minute. When the examination was over, Carol covered Emma with a warm blanket. "You're doing great," she said softly. "You're very brave." Dr. Bennett re-entered the room and pulled up his stool again. "Emma," he said, choosing his words carefully, "your body has been through a lot. Do you remember what caused these injuries?" Emma shook her head, her face a mix of confusion and fear. "I don't know," she whispered. "I woke up, and everything hurt. Then there was the baby." Dr. Bennett exchanged a glance with Rachel. Whatever had happened to Emma was more than a medical emergency. It was a tragedy still unfolding. He leaned in closer. "Emma, I know this is hard, but we're here to help you. You're safe now. No one can hurt you here." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Will you take the baby away?" she asked, her voice cracking. Dr. Bennett shook his head. "No one is going to take him away. We're here to take care of both of you. But we need to understand what happened so we can protect you." At that moment, the door opened, and a social worker named Sarah entered, accompanied by a police officer in plain clothes. The man kept a respectful distance, his demeanor calm but attentive. Sarah introduced herself with a gentle smile. "Hi, Emma. I'm here to make sure you're safe and that you get everything you need. Is it all right if we talk for a bit?" Emma's eyes darted toward Dr. Bennett, who nodded reassuringly. "It's okay," he said. "I'll be right here." Reluctantly, Emma nodded, and Sarah stepped forward, sitting in a chair near the bed. "You don't have to be afraid," Sarah said gently. "You're safe here. Can you tell me how you came to the hospital today?" Emma stared at her hands. "I walked," she said softly. "A lady saw me and said I needed to come here." Sarah pressed on with care. "Were you alone before that?" Emma nodded, but offered no further details. The room fell silent, each person keenly aware that the truth was fragile and difficult to reach. Dr. Bennett spoke up, his voice steady but concerned. "Emma, it's important for us to know about the baby. Is he yours?" The room held its collective breath. Emma looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "I think so," she whispered. "I don't know how, but he's mine." Rachel, who had been standing quietly in the corner, felt her heart ache at the pain and confusion in Emma's words. Whatever had happened to this girl, it was clear she was both a victim and a protector. Sarah leaned closer, her voice as soft as the touch of a breeze. "Emma, we believe you. We just want to keep you both safe. Can you tell us more about your family? Is there anyone we can call for you?" Emma shook her head vigorously. "No," she said, her voice sharp with panic. "They can't know I'm here." The urgency of her tone sent a chill through the room. It was clear that whatever she was running from was a source of great fear. Dr. Bennett exchanged a grave look with Sarah. They were dealing with more than a simple case. They were stepping into a nightmare. Sarah spoke softly. "Emma, whatever it is, you're not alone anymore. We'll help you, I promise." Emma nodded, but the fear in her eyes remained. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting a pale glow through the hospital's windows as the intensity within St. Mary's Hospital deepened. Outside Emma's room, the hallway was a hive of activity. Nurses moved purposefully, doctors conferred in hushed tones, and the faint scent of antiseptic hung in the air. But within the walls of Emma's room, a quiet and fragile tension settled. The gravity of her situation was slowly coming into focus. Dr. Bennett, Rachel, and Sarah, the social worker, stood just outside the door, speaking in low voices. Their faces were etched with concern and determination. "She's terrified," Sarah said, crossing her arms tightly as if to protect herself from the weight of it all. "Whatever happened to her, it's clear she's been through unimaginable trauma." Dr. Bennett nodded, his eyes flicking back to the room. "Physically, she's exhausted and in pain. Emotionally, she's even more fragile. But we need to help her piece this together, not just for her sake, but for the baby's." Rachel's jaw clenched. "I hate to think of what she's endured." At that moment, a man approached. He was tall, dressed in a suit, with a badge discreetly clipped to his belt. Detective Alex Moore introduced himself, his expression serious but empathetic. "I'm here to speak with the girl, Emma," he said, his tone gentle yet firm. "I understand this is delicate, but we need to begin gathering information." Sarah looked at Dr. Bennett, who gave a subtle nod. "Only if we're careful," the doctor said. "She's barely holding on." Back in the room, Emma sat with her knees pulled to her chest. The baby, now resting peacefully in a hospital bassinet, seemed to offer her the only anchor in a sea of confusion and fear. When Detective Moore entered, he approached slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. He pulled a chair to sit at eye level with Emma. "Hi, Emma," he said softly. "My name is Detective Moore. I'm here to make sure you and the baby are safe. Can we talk a little bit?" Emma glanced at him, wary but not dismissive. "Is he going to take me away?" she whispered to Rachel, who stood nearby for reassurance. "No, sweetheart," Rachel said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He's here to help." The detective nodded, his voice gentle. "That's right, Emma. I'm here to listen and make sure nothing like this ever happens to you again." Emma's gaze fell to her hands. Silence stretched uncomfortably, but Moore was patient. Finally, in a shaky voice, she began, I woke up, and there was blood," she said, the memory clearly haunting her. "I was in pain, and he was just there, crying. I didn't know what to do." Detective Moore kept his expression carefully neutral. "You did what you could, Emma. You protected him." She nodded, tears spilling over. "I tried to be quiet. I didn't want anyone to hear." "Why?" Moore asked softly. Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. He would have been mad, really mad. A tense silence filled the room as the pieces of the story began to take a clearer shape. Rachel clenched her hands at her sides, fighting back anger on Emma's behalf. She had seen too many children hurt, too many families shattered. But this was something else. Detective Moore spoke carefully. "Emma, when you say who are you talking about?" The words seemed to catch in her throat. She closed her eyes tightly, as if trying to block out a painful memory. "My stepfather," she whispered finally. "He said no one would believe me." Rachel felt her knees weaken. Dr. Bennett, who had quietly re-entered the room, placed a comforting hand on Rachel's arm. "It's okay, Emma," he said gently. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Emma wiped her eyes, her shoulders trembling. "I didn't want it to happen. I didn't know what to do." "You didn't do anything wrong," Rachel said, her voice firm but kind. "None of this is your fault." Detective Moore leaned in slightly. "Emma, I know this is incredibly hard. You've been so brave to come here today. We're going to make sure you're protected. I promise." The weight of his words hung heavy, but they seemed to spark a glimmer of hope in Emma's eyes. For the first time, she appeared to believe that help was possible. As the conversation drew to a close, Sarah stepped forward. "Emma, I'm going to work with the team here and with Detective Moore to make sure you and the baby have a safe place to go. You won't be alone." The fear didn't vanish completely, but Emma nodded. "Okay," she whispered, glancing at the baby, "as long as he's safe." "He will be," Sarah assured her. "And so will you." Outside the room, as the door closed softly behind them, Detective Moore turned to Dr. Bennett and Rachel. "We need to build a case. Social services, protective custody, medical evidence, it all needs to move quickly." Rachel nodded, her face determined. "We'll do whatever it takes." Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital room's blinds, casting soft, warm light on Emma and the baby. Emma sat up in the hospital bed, her gaze never straying far from the bassinet, where the infant slept peacefully. The events of the past days had left her exhausted, but there was a fragile sense of calm in this moment, something Rachel and Dr. Bennett were determined to protect. Rachel entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with a steaming cup of tea and a plate of toast. "Good morning, Emma," she said softly, placing the tray on the small table by the bed. "I thought you might be hungry." Emma nodded, though she didn't move immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the baby, as if afraid that even blinking would take him away from her. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "He's more than okay," Rachel assured her, sitting on the edge of the bed. "He's a strong little guy, and he's safe here." Emma nodded again, but her shoulders remained tense. Rachel reached out and placed a comforting hand on Emma's arm. "You're safe too, Emma." A quiet knock interrupted them, and Dr. Bennett entered, accompanied by Dr. Julia Harper, the hospital's child psychologist. Julia was a tall woman with kind eyes and a calming presence. She offered Emma a gentle smile as she approached. "Good morning, Emma," Julia said, pulling a chair closer. "I'm Dr. Harper, but you can call me Julia. I'm here to talk with you, if that's okay." Emma's eyes darted nervously between Rachel and Dr. Bennett before settling on Julia. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice hesitant but willing. Julia leaned forward slightly, keeping her tone gentle. "I know you've been through so much, Emma. You don't have to talk about anything you're not ready to, but I want you to know that we're all here to help you. No one here wants to hurt you." Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away, focusing on the baby. "I don't want him to take the baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Rachel squeezed her hand gently. "He won't," she promised. "You're both protected here." Over the next hour, Julia spoke with Emma, carefully guiding the conversation without pressure. She asked simple questions about Emma's likes and dislikes, about school, and about anything that made her feel safe. Slowly, Emma's responses grew longer, though her wariness never fully disappeared. The bond between her and the baby remained clear. Every movement, every sound from the infant drew her immediate attention. When Julia paused to let Emma rest, Rachel stood up. "Would you like to help feed him?" she asked, a soft smile on her face. Emma's eyes brightened momentarily. "I can do that?" "Of course," Rachel said, guiding her gently. Together they moved to the bassinet. Rachel showed Emma how to hold the bottle and support the baby, all while offering words of encouragement. "He's hungry," Emma observed, a small smile tugging at her lips as the baby latched onto the bottle. "He's really hungry." "You're doing a great job, Emma," Rachel said. "He's lucky to have you." The moment of peace was interrupted by a knock on the door. Julia opened it to find two figures waiting: Sarah, the social worker, and Linda, a representative from Child Protective Services. Linda was a middle-aged woman with a kind but firm demeanor. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room with gentle concern. "Hi, Emma," Linda said, keeping her voice soft. "I'm here to talk about making sure you and your baby are safe." Emma tensed, instinctively pulling the baby closer. "No one's taking him," she said, her voice shaking. "No one is taking him away," Linda assured her. "We're here to help you, both of you. We need to make sure you're safe and have what you need." Julia placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "You're not alone, Emma. We're all here for you." A long conversation followed, with Linda explaining their role and the steps they would take to protect Emma and her baby. There were options, places she could stay temporarily, programs designed to help young mothers, and support systems that would be put in place. But every mention of leaving the hospital or entering the care of others brought fresh waves of anxiety. "I don't want to go anywhere without him," Emma insisted. "We'll work with you," Linda promised. "No one is going to separate you without making sure it's what's best for both of you." As the meeting drew to a close, Linda and Sarah left the room, but Julia and Rachel stayed. They knew that building trust would take time. Rachel handed Emma a soft blanket and helped her settle back into bed. "You've been incredibly brave, Emma," she said gently. "You're not alone. We're going to keep working together, okay?" Emma nodded slowly, exhaustion etched into her features. She leaned back, clutching the baby close. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. As the day wore on, hospital staff continued to check in, offering small comforts and moments of normalcy. A warm meal, a book, a soft toy for the baby. Each interaction was carefully managed to reinforce one thing: Emma and her baby were safe, and they would not have to face this journey alone. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital room, bathing everything in a muted orange glow. Emma sat by the window, cradling her baby, lost in thought. The baby's rhythmic breathing was the only sound, a fragile reassurance in the overwhelming silence that seemed to fill every corner of her mind. She knew they would come back to ask more questions. She knew they were trying to help, but the weight of her memories was suffocating. Rachel entered quietly, her face kind but serious. She carried a notebook and a pen, signaling this conversation was about more than small talk. Behind her, Julia followed, offering a gentle smile and settling into a chair near Emma. "Emma, we need to talk," Rachel said softly. "There are things we need to understand so that we can help you. You've been incredibly brave, but we need to know more about what happened." Emma's grip on the baby tightened instinctively. She looked at Julia, searching for reassurance. Julia leaned forward slightly. "You're safe, Emma. We won't let anyone hurt you, but whatever you tell us will help keep you and your baby protected." Emma nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. She swallowed hard. "I don't want to talk about it," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel hesitated but pressed on, knowing the importance of what had to come next. "I understand this is hard. You don't have to say everything at once, and we'll go at your pace. But we need to know who hurt you." Emma looked down at the baby, tracing his tiny fingers with her own. He said I couldn't tell anyone, that no one would believe me." Julia moved closer, her voice filled with compassion. "That's what abusers do. They make you feel alone and powerless. But you're not alone, Emma. We believe you." The room fell silent for a long moment. Emma took a shaky breath. "My stepfather," she whispered. He would come to my room at night, when my mom was at work." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears she tried to hold back. Julia closed her eyes for a brief second, composing herself before speaking. "Emma, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice steady, but thick with emotion. "You did nothing wrong. What he did was wrong. It wasn't your fault." Tears streamed down Emma's face. "I tried to make it stop. I thought if I was quiet, maybe he'd leave me alone. But then I got sick, and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't understand." Rachel stood, her instincts as a nurse and a mother at war within her. "He can't hurt you anymore, Emma," she said firmly. "We're going to make sure of that." Julia reached out and took Emma's free hand. "Thank you for telling us. That was incredibly brave. We're going to help you through this, but there's more we'll need to do. The police and social workers will have to be involved." Emma shook her head frantically. "I don't want to see him again. I can't." "You won't," Rachel said, her voice like steel. "We'll make sure of it." There was a knock at the door. It was Linda, the social worker, accompanied by Detective Foster, a seasoned officer with a gentle demeanor. He removed his hat respectfully as he entered and approached cautiously, his tone calm and non-threatening. "Emma, I'm Detective Foster. I know this is a lot, but I'm here to help make sure the man who hurt you can never do it again, to anyone." Emma looked to Julia, who nodded encouragingly. We'll be right here the whole time." Over the next tense hour, Emma haltingly recounted pieces of her story. The atmosphere was heavy with grief and anger, but every word she spoke chipped away at the darkness that had enveloped her for so long. By the end, she was exhausted, clutching the baby tightly as if he were her lifeline. When the questioning ended, Detective Foster stood. "Thank you, Emma. You've done something incredibly brave today. You've taken the first step to protect yourself and your baby." As he left, Linda approached. "You don't have to do this alone, Emma. We'll make sure you have support." Rachel helped her back to bed, exhaustion evident on every inch of her face. "Rest now," Rachel whispered. "You've done more than enough for today." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room into twilight, Julia stayed by Emma's side, offering silent comfort. They all knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but they had taken the first crucial steps toward justice and healing. The morning sun cast a pale light across the bustling hospital corridors, contrasting with the heavy atmosphere that clung to Emma's room. Rachel and Julia had spent most of the night checking in on Emma, ensuring that she and the baby were as comfortable as possible. But today they knew would bring even more difficult conversations and decisions. Linda, the social worker assigned to Emma's case, arrived with files in hand and a determined expression. She greeted Rachel and Julia with a tired smile before glancing at Emma, who was quietly rocking the baby. "Good morning, Emma," Linda said gently as she approached. "We're going to talk about some important steps today, but I promise you, everything we're doing is to keep you and your baby safe." Emma nodded silently, exhaustion etched into every line of her young face. She was grateful for the kindness she'd been shown, but wary of what might come next. The baby, sensing her tension, squirmed and whimpered. Julia stepped in, offering her arms to hold the child so that Emma could focus. Rachel leaned down beside Emma. "We're here with you, whatever happens," Linda began, her tone soft but matter-of-fact. "Emma, you've been through so much. We need to make sure you're protected, and that means involving more people. The authorities are already working to ensure your stepfather faces justice. But we also need to talk about what's best for you and the baby moving forward." Emma's eyes darted toward the door, as if searching for an escape. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Linda took a deep breath. "We want you to be in a safe place where you can recover, where you can start to heal, and where the baby can be cared for too. There's a family willing to foster both of you, temporarily at first. Their names are Linda and Robert Carter. They're experienced with cases like yours." Emma's fingers clenched the hospital bed sheets. "I don't want to be away from the hospital. I feel safe here." "I understand," Linda said empathetically. "And we won't force anything without your agreement. The Carters want to meet you first. They know you've been through a lot, and they're willing to give you and your baby the space you need." The door creaked open, and Linda and Robert Carter stepped in. Linda was a woman with warm eyes and a calm demeanor. Robert had a quiet strength about him. They moved slowly, as if wary of startling Emma. "Hello, Emma," Linda Carter said softly. "We've heard about how strong and brave you are. We're here to help however we can." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You want to take him away from me," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't you?" Robert knelt beside her. "No, Emma. We're here to help you keep him safe and give you both a home where you can feel protected." The room fell silent. Emma searched their faces, trying to find any hint of deception or ill intent. All she saw was concern. Julia, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "Emma, you deserve a place where you can heal without fear, but the choice is yours." The tension in Emma's shoulders eased slightly. Can I see where you live before I decide?" Linda Carter's smile was warm. "Of course, we'd be honored." The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, meetings, and explanations. Rachel stayed close to Emma, offering reassurance whenever the process became too overwhelming. At one point, she gently brushed Emma's hair from her face and whispered, "You're doing the right thing, for both of you." Finally, arrangements were made for Emma to visit the Carters' home. Linda, the social worker, emphasized that this was not a permanent decision, and Emma would have time to make up her mind. Emma nodded, clutching her baby tightly, as if drawing strength from his small, warm presence. Before leaving, Emma had one request. Can you promise that no one will take him from me?" Rachel knelt beside her. "I promise, Emma. We'll be with you every step of the way." As the day ended, Emma prepared to leave the hospital for the first time since she had arrived with the baby in her arms. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, hope flickered in the depths of her weary eyes. The drive to the Carters' home was quiet. Emma stared out of the window, clutching her baby protectively against her chest. The rhythmic hum of the car engine was the only sound as the social worker, Linda, navigated the suburban streets. Beside her, Robert Carter stole occasional glances in the rearview mirror, aware of the fragile trust he and his wife would have to build. The Carters' house was modest but inviting, with a wide front porch adorned by hanging flower baskets and a rocking chair that creaked gently in the breeze. Emma hesitated as the car came to a stop, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent most of her life in places that felt anything but safe. This quiet, welcoming home was foreign territory. "Take your time, Emma," Robert said softly as he stepped out of the car. Linda moved around to open Emma's door, offering her a steadying hand. Emma ignored the gesture but stepped out, her eyes scanning the surroundings like a cornered animal, assessing an unfamiliar space. The moment they entered the house, Linda Carter led them to the cozy living room. A soft rug covered the floor, and books lined the shelves. The scent of fresh-baked cookies lingered in the air, as if the house itself was making an effort to be welcoming. Emma shifted uneasily, tightening her hold on her baby. "Would you like to sit?" Linda Carter gestured toward a cushioned armchair. Emma nodded warily and lowered herself into the seat, her eyes never leaving the baby. Linda and Robert sat across from her, leaving a comfortable distance. The social worker positioned herself nearby, maintaining a reassuring presence. "Emma," Linda Carter began, her voice gentle but firm, "you're not here to be pressured. We're offering a space where you can breathe a little easier, where you and your baby can rest and heal. Nothing has to be decided today." Emma nodded, her throat tight. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. Her fingers played nervously with the baby's blanket. "I don't know how to trust anyone." "That's okay," Robert said, his tone calm and measured. "We're strangers to you right now. Trust takes time." Silence settled over the room, heavy, but not uncomfortable. After a few moments, Linda Carter asked, "Would you like to see the room we've prepared for you and your baby? It's up to you." Emma nodded hesitantly. She followed them up the narrow staircase, each step creaking slightly underfoot. At the end of the hall, Linda pushed open a door to reveal a small but warmly decorated room. The crib stood by the window, bathed in soft light. A mobile with small stars and clouds hung above it, gently spinning. "It's for him?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Linda replied. "We want you both to feel comfortable. You can stay with him, always." Emma stepped inside, her fingers brushing the edge of the crib. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to hope. Then, doubt crept back in. "What if you change your mind?" she demanded, turning to face them. "What if you decide we're too much trouble?" Robert stepped forward, careful not to crowd her. "Emma, I can't promise things will be easy. There will be tough days, but we don't walk away from people we care about. We're here to help, not to hurt." Over the next several days, Emma tested their words. She refused help when offered, snapped at even the smallest perceived slight, and withdrew into herself. But Linda and Robert met her with patience and consistency. They invited her to join them for meals, even when she refused to eat. They offered to help with the baby, though Emma often declined, fearing that any assistance would weaken her fragile grip on motherhood. One evening, as the baby cried inconsolably, Emma's exhaustion reached its peak. Linda found her pacing the room, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to soothe him. Without a word, Linda took the baby, cradling him with practiced ease while murmuring a lullaby. Emma collapsed into the rocking chair, her body trembling. "He's not going to stop crying for me," she choked out. "I'm not good enough." Linda's gaze softened, but her voice was steady. "Being a mother doesn't mean having all the answers, Emma. It means loving and trying, even when it's hard, and you're doing exactly that." Emma looked away, ashamed. "I don't know how to be anything else but scared." "That's okay too," Linda said gently. "Fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. But you don't have to face it alone." The baby quieted, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Linda handed him back, and Emma accepted him, this time with slightly steadier hands. It was a small step, but in that moment, trust began to take root. Over the following weeks, the Carters continued to work at building Emma's trust. Linda took Emma grocery shopping, letting her pick out food and small items for the baby. Robert taught her how to fix a broken hinge on a cabinet, his hand steady as he guided her through each step. Bit by bit, they showed her that this home was not a prison, but a refuge. One evening, Emma found herself sitting on the porch with Robert, watching the sunset. "I'm scared," she admitted again. It was becoming easier to say out loud. "I know," he replied, "but you're brave too, braver than you think." Emma fell silent, the weight of the past still heavy on her shoulders, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future could hold something more than fear and pain. The courthouse loomed tall and imposing, its pale stone walls seeming to hold the weight of 1,000 untold stories. For Emma, it was a place of dread, a final confrontation with everything she feared. As she walked through the heavy doors, her hand tightly gripping Linda Carter's, she could feel her knees trembling. The sounds of footsteps and murmurs echoed off the marble floors, creating a deafening backdrop to her racing thoughts. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, but no less intimidating. Rows of wooden benches stretched out on either side, separated by a central aisle. At the front, the judge's bench stood high above the rest, a reminder of the power held within these walls. Emma's heart pounded as she took her seat near the front, her eyes darting around the room. The air felt thick, heavy with expectation. Linda and Robert sat beside her, their presence a quiet assurance. To Emma's right, a social worker she had come to know well, Karen, gave her a soft smile. "We're all here with you," Karen whispered. Emma nodded numbly, her throat too tight to speak. The room hushed as the door opened, and a man in handcuffs was led inside. Emma's breath caught in her chest. Her stepfather. His face was one she had tried to forget, etched with cruelty and a twisted smirk that haunted her nightmares. But now, shackled and flanked by officers, he seemed smaller, less powerful. Even so, fear coursed through her veins, making it hard to breathe. "Defendant, please stand," the judge ordered, her voice firm but neutral. The proceedings began, and Emma tried to focus on the words, but they blurred together. Charges were read, lawyers spoke in tones both harsh and measured, and evidence was presented. Each statement, each piece of evidence, was a painful reminder of the life she had endured. When her name was called, Emma felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Linda, who squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You can do this," Linda said softly. "You're not alone." With shaking legs, Emma rose and walked to the stand. The room seemed to tilt as she was sworn in, but she forced herself to breathe deeply. She had to be strong, for herself and for the baby she now cradled in her arms. "Miss Emma," the prosecutor began, his voice calm and gentle, "we're going to ask you some questions. If at any point you need a break, please let us know." Emma nodded. Her hands felt clammy, but she held the baby close, using his presence to ground herself. The questions started slowly, asking about her background, her family, and the events leading up to that fateful day. She answered as best she could, her voice trembling but clear. Then came the harder questions, the ones that dug into the darkest parts of her past. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted the abuse, the fear, and the helplessness. Every word felt like a jagged stone tearing at her insides. At one point, she faltered, unable to continue. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her story hanging heavy in the air. "Would you like to take a break?" the judge asked, her tone unexpectedly kind. Emma shook her head, wiping her tears. "No," she whispered. "I need to finish." She pushed through, recounting the events that led her to the hospital, how she had gathered the strength to run, to protect the baby she never asked for, but couldn't abandon. By the time she finished, the room felt different. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was heavy with empathy, with the understanding of the horror she had survived. When she was done, the prosecutor nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Emma. You're very brave." The defense attorney rose next. His tone was colder, more clinical, and Emma braced herself for the cross-examination. He tried to discredit her, to poke holes in her story. He spoke of inconsistencies, of memory lapses, of fear clouding her judgment. Each word felt like a fresh wound, but Emma held firm, refusing to be broken again. Through it all, Linda, Robert, and Karen watched with unwavering support. Their presence was her anchor, their strength bolstering her own. When it was finally over, Emma felt as if a tremendous weight had been lifted, though she knew this battle was far from won. The closing arguments were delivered, and the judge called for a recess. Emma left the stand and was immediately enveloped by Linda's arms. "You did so well," Linda whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." They waited anxiously for the verdict. Hours passed, each minute stretching into eternity. When the court reconvened, Emma's heart raced. The judge's words were deliberate and final. Her stepfather was found guilty on all counts. There would be sentencing, appeals, and legal complexities ahead. But for now, justice had been served, and tears of relief streamed down Emma's face. It wasn't over. Not really. Healing would be a long road, and the scars would never fully fade. But in that moment, she felt something she hadn't dared to hope for in a long time, a sense of victory. The fight wasn't over, but she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. As they left the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm light on the steps below. Emma closed her eyes and lifted her face to the sky. The warm morning sun spilled through the windows of the Carter family's cozy kitchen, painting everything in hues of gold. Emma sat at the wooden table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The soft murmur of morning routines filled the room. Robert humming quietly as he flipped pancakes, Linda setting out plates with gentle clinks and clatters, and the distant laughter of neighborhood children playing outside. For a moment, it felt almost normal, almost like a life she might have always known. But beneath the surface, the challenges of adjusting to her new life were never far from Emma's mind. Just a week had passed since the trial. While the guilty verdict brought a measure of closure, it had also opened the door to new uncertainties and fears. The world outside the courthouse hadn't stopped turning, and neither could she. "Emma," Linda's gentle voice cut through her thoughts. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Emma looked up, startled. She hadn't even realized she was staring at her untouched tea. "I'm fine," she replied softly, forcing a smile. "Just, thinking." Linda's eyes, full of warmth and understanding, lingered on her for a moment. "It's a lot to process," she said, placing a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "But you don't have to go through it alone. We're here, always." Emma nodded, the weight of Linda's words sinking in. She wanted to believe it, to trust that this new family wouldn't slip away like so many fleeting moments of safety before. But trust, she knew, was not built in a day. The baby stirred in his crib nearby, and Emma was at his side in an instant. She lifted him gently, cradling his small form against her chest. "You're okay, Miguel," she whispered, more to reassure herself than him. "We're okay." Later that day, Linda drove Emma and Miguel to their first therapy session with Dr. Julia Harper, the psychologist who had supported Emma throughout the trial. The office was bright and welcoming, with soft furniture and shelves lined with colorful books. Emma settled into a cushioned chair, holding Miguel close as she glanced around nervously. Dr. Harper smiled warmly as she entered. "It's good to see you, Emma. How are you feeling today?" Emma hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She felt so many things at once: relief, fear, hope, exhaustion. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice small. "Everything's different." "Different can be hard," Dr. Harper acknowledged, taking a seat across from her. "It can also be the start of something better. Why don't we talk about what feels hardest for you right now?" Emma bit her lip, staring at the floor. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore," she said after a long silence. "I used to just survive. Now I'm supposed to be a mom, and I don't even know how to be me." Dr. Harper leaned forward, her expression kind but serious. "Emma, you don't have to have all the answers right now. Being a mom, being yourself, it's not about doing it perfectly. It's about showing up. And you're already doing that." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes. But what if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough for him? Dr. Harper let the question hang in the air, giving it the weight it deserved. Emma, every parent worries about that. Every single one. But you're not alone. You have people around you who care. And you have love. That's more powerful than you know. They spoke for nearly an hour, touching on everything from Emma's fears to her hopes for the future. When the session ended, Emma felt drained but lighter. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was a step. Over the following weeks, Emma worked hard to find a new sense of normalcy. Linda and Robert were patient and supportive, but adjusting wasn't easy. Some nights, nightmares still gripped her, pulling her back to places she wanted desperately to leave behind. Other days, she struggled with feeling like an outsider in her new home, even though the Carters went out of their way to make her feel welcome. Then there was Miguel. Every cry, every feeding, every sleepless night was a reminder of the responsibility resting on her young shoulders. Emma often doubted herself, but she couldn't deny the fierce love she felt for him. He was her reason to keep going. One day, while taking Miguel for a walk in the park, Emma met another young mother, Sarah, who was pushing a stroller of her own. They exchanged polite smiles, and soon they were talking. Sarah was a few years older, but warm and easy to talk to. She didn't pry or judge, she simply listened. "You're doing great," Sarah said, watching as Emma soothed Miguel's cries. "Motherhood's a wild ride, but you've got the touch." Emma blushed, unused to praise. "I'm just trying my best." "That's all any of us can do," Sarah said with a grin. "Want to walk together?" In Sarah, Emma found a small but important connection, a friend who understood some of her struggles, even if she didn't know the whole story. Their walks became a regular part of Emma's routine, offering a chance to talk, laugh, and feel a little less alone. As weeks turned into months, Emma began to find her footing. She started attending school again with tutors to help her catch up on what she'd missed. It was daunting, but she was determined. She wanted a future, for herself and for Miguel. There were setbacks, of course. Trust didn't come easily, and fear still lurked in the corners of her mind. But Emma was learning that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a journey, with steps forward and back, and with each step, she grew stronger. One evening, as she rocked Miguel to sleep, Emma whispered softly to him. "We're going to be okay," she said, more confident than before. "I don't know how, but we will." Miguel's tiny fingers curled around hers, and in that moment, Emma believed it. They had a long road ahead, but they weren't walking it alone. The early spring air was crisp, but carried a hint of warmth, signaling a change in seasons. In the Carter family's garden, the sunflowers Emma had planted months ago were beginning to sprout. Their tender green shoots reached toward the sky, a quiet testament to growth and resilience. Emma knelt in the dirt, her hands dirty, but her expression focused. This small patch of soil had become her refuge, a place where she could watch life begin again, just as she was learning to do. "Emma!" Linda's voice carried from the kitchen window. "Lunch is ready, sweetheart." Emma wiped her hands on her jeans and picked up Miguel, who was happily playing with a plastic shovel. His giggles filled the air as she lifted him, and for a moment, everything felt right. Together they headed inside, where the warm smells of tomato soup and freshly baked bread welcomed them. Over lunch, Robert, ever the doting father figure, recounted stories from his own childhood. He made silly faces to make Miguel laugh, and Emma couldn't help but smile. This was her family now, not by blood, but by something deeper. Trust, care, love. After lunch, Emma met with her tutor to continue catching up on her schoolwork. It was exhausting but fulfilling. Every equation solved, every history fact memorized, felt like another piece of her life coming back together. She was determined to graduate, to show Miguel that they could have a future free from fear. But even as Emma worked hard to rebuild her life, challenges still loomed. At therapy sessions with Dr. Harper, she wrestled with guilt and self-doubt. "I'm still scared," she admitted one afternoon, twisting her hands nervously. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if I mess everything up?" Dr. Harper's expression was patient, as always. "Emma, strength isn't about never feeling afraid. It's about what you do, even when you're scared. And you've already proven that you're strong. You're here, caring for Miguel, facing your past. That's real courage." Emma let the words sink in. She wanted to believe them, to trust that her past didn't define her future. Slowly, she was learning to silence the voice that whispered she wasn't enough. One day, a letter arrived from her biological mother. It was the first communication Emma had received since everything happened. She hesitated to open it, fear and longing warring within her. With Linda by her side, she finally unfolded the paper. The words were messy, as if written in haste, but the message was clear: remorse, apologies, and a desperate hope for reconciliation. "What are you thinking?" Linda asked gently. "I don't know," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Part of me wants to scream at her. Part of me misses her." Linda nodded, understanding etched into her features. "Whatever you decide, we're here for you. You don't have to go through this alone." Emma chose to write back. It wasn't an easy letter. She poured out her pain, her anger, and her longing. She didn't know if it would lead to anything, but it felt like a step toward healing. As spring turned to summer, Emma continued to grow. She joined a support group for young mothers, where she found community and understanding. The women shared stories, laughter, and tears. And for the first time, Emma didn't feel so different or alone. She made friends who helped her navigate motherhood's challenges and celebrated Miguel's milestones alongside her. There were setbacks, of course. Nights when Miguel's cries brought back painful memories. Days when self-doubt crept in, whispering that she would never be enough. But Emma kept moving forward, one day at a time. By late summer, Emma stood before a small crowd at a community event, prepared to share her story for the first time. Her hands shook as she gripped the microphone, but she found strength in the faces of Linda, Robert, and Miguel, who watched from the front row. "I used to think my story ended with pain," she began, her voice steadying with each word. "But I've learned that endings can be beginnings. I'm not defined by what happened to me. I'm defined by what I choose to do now, for myself, for my son." Applause erupted, but it was the silent, supportive nods that meant the most. She had found her voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. That night, as she tucked Miguel into bed, Emma whispered softly, "We're going to be okay. I promise." She kissed his forehead, feeling hope bloom within her like the sunflowers outside. In the days that followed, Emma continued to build her life, attending school, caring for Miguel, and leaning on the family and friends who had become her support system. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Thank you for joining me for this story. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel to stay updated on the heartfelt stories I'm passionate about sharing. Your support means the world to me and motivates me to keep creating. I'm truly grateful to have you on this journey with me.